Okay, sounds like the stuff is going. So really quickly, a few points of order. One, this is a talk that I wrote as a research paper. It has been submitted to a historical journal, or an academic journal, so I can say I'm a published historian now. That's cool. It is in the process of editing, but I only bring that up because if you are interested in the written copy of this, there is the current version, and then there will be a final version here within a few weeks that is actually being submitted. I'm working with a team of editors to get it, I guess, up to academic par. But I'll have a paper out in the lobby after this talk. If you're interested in it, just write down your email or your phone number, and I'll find a way to get it to you. It's no worries. And second, I had a second point of order, but I've totally forgotten it.
Silence phones?
Yo, well, sure. Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one, silence phones. Okay, so, I'm gonna turn this. Can you guys still hear me like this? Yes? Okay, cool. So, before I start, really quickly, this paper is about understanding early Christianity, the first 150 years. And understanding that it is not necessarily like popular understanding of a poor man's religion, of a religion that was only really converted by Jewish converts in the beginning, stuff like that. That it was much more multicultural. And so, to start with the paper, let's start. So, understanding of early Christian tends to be lacking when compared to later and better documented years of the church itself. Previous historical opinion held that Christianity, in its infancy, was a religion largely spread through the lower classes, the poor man's religion. It was also held that beyond the poor, it was a religion of the marginalized and disenfranchised, and that the promises of earthly salvation and everything's going to be all right when you pass didn't really attract more well-off and privileged people. Additionally, it was believed that a majority of the converts were from Jewish communities. More modern research and reanalysis points to a significantly different understanding of early Christianity. Additionally, taking a closer look at letters from Paul the Apostle, for example, specifically his letters to Corinth and Rome, helps fill in what early Christian societies actually looked like. What they looked like and what they were composed of is overlooked, and as will be shown in this paper, it was found Christianity was found to be spread throughout all social classes and all peoples. And it was not just one group or one class that was converting. And it had a myriad amount of converts. Wayne Meeks, an author, also, by the way, I'm going to be giving out some names right now, like throughout this paper. You don't have to understand them. It's just how the paper was written. If you want more information, I'll give you more information. Wayne Meeks takes time during his book, The First Urban Christians, to paint a picture of what life was like in the cities that Christians would come to inhabit. It paints the Roman Empire as a large metropolitan empire populated by many different ethnic and religious sects. Roman cities, especially after they expanded to the east, into Turkey and into Greece, were a very, very multicultural society. Quote, groups of foreigners gathered, merchants and artisans, persons enslaved and displaced, political exiles, soldiers of fortune, all of them, end quote, all of them were present in any Roman city that you could find. Most cities not only contained their own populations, but diaspora and slaves from across the frontier. And they formed essentially enclaves, or like little, essentially like Chinatowns, like their own little sections within cities. The city of Corinth is a key example of this multiculturalism. Despite being abandoned for a century, a Roman colony formed in 44 BC, and this city had, it used to be a very large and prosperous city, like basically the capital of the region that it was in, and it had been abandoned. But this new colony, quote, quickly began to regain its former prominence in 44 CE. So it had been colonized in about 40 CE. In 44 CE, the original Roman colonists and their descendants, as well as a large Greek population with ethnic areas for people across the Mediterranean, existed. This is why the city of Corinth is a great example of Rome itself. By the 1st century CE, Rome sprang from Britain, from London in the north, all the way down to Egypt, from Spain to basically Ukraine. Like, it was a massive, massive empire and populated by many, many people. It was in this landscape that early Christianity would branch out of the Jewish faith and spread across Rome. This awareness of the multiculturalism of Rome is notably lacking in popular understandings of, like, a poor man's religion, so to say. Paul's writing in Corinthians, his letters to Corinth, help us better understand the interactions between Christians and polytheist converts. So, Dorvan, another author that you don't need to know, work of contextualizing Paul's messages in Corinthians, and describes what took place when Paul arrived, and it significantly draws into question the extent to which conversions were still mostly from Jewish people. Christianity, as early as the late 40s, early 50s CE, so within like 20 years of Jesus' death, also saw a new source of converts, and began promoting conversion of Gentiles, of non-Jewish people, much more heavily. These new Gentile converts held many different traditions, as you would expect. You know, an Egyptian is going to hold certain views, a Greek, a Roman, a Spanish, Iberia, but you know, Spanish person. They're all going to have different thoughts, and Christianity was branching out into these groups. As it found itself spreading from Judea and the Levant into Turkey, into Greece, and into Italy itself, into Rome, it found itself much more varied. We see this through Paul's letters to Corinth and Rome, that they aren't necessarily following what Pauline, or some people call Galatian, I think it is, or Galatean rather, Christianity. The Christianity that we're now, or that Christianity as we understand it now, is based off of. It wasn't necessarily followed the same way, you know, in every city. Beyond that, so Corinth is a key example of that, as it was a very multicultural city. And beyond that, we'll also be discussing Rome, the capital of the empire, and its relationship to early Christianity. The community at the heart of Rome is a testament to the fact that Christianity was able to spread in an empire that didn't view them as, you know, anything really, and that it's a key example of the tensions between the early Christian community and the Jewish community, because there was early Christians had a large problem with, or Jews and early Christians used to fight. The first 150 years is spotted through history with massive fights and riots and, you know, brutal, like, sort of gang wars, essentially. And that's very important to understand. Beyond that, I'm also discussing the historiography of the social classes. So what social groups were made up of. And so this understanding of the poor man's religion, that this is a religion that is largely made of poor people, goes all the way back to Paul. I mean, Paul explicitly writes that that his members are coming from, quote, from the poor and dispossessed of the Roman provinces. He thinks that is how Christianity spread. So this is something that has been perpetuated since the beginning of Christianity, really. However, this is not really the case. What we understand about, like, underclasses today, like class societies, is very much painted on this idea of, like, the society that we live in, right? So, you know, we have three classes: lower, middle, and upper class. That's the way that we understand society today. That's the way we understand class today. Back then, class was much more different, and it varied a lot. You know, obviously, there was an importance on if you were a man or a woman, but also, were you a noble in the or were you or your family nobles in the province before Rome came here? You know, did you serve in the military? Did you serve in a public office? Do you have money, period? You know, there's a bunch of different sort of categories in the old Roman Empire, and so it's not really effective to say that it's a poor man's religion, because we're placing our understanding of classes on a time when that really isn't the case. That's not how society was structured. So, quote, a bunch of different things, including ethnic origin, citizenship, personal liberty, wealth, occupation, age, sex, and public office or honors were all categories. We also see through early Christian society that, members themselves, we have evidence that members themselves were not all just poor members. As a community, we find that they had members wealthy enough to support, quote, congregational burial funds, almsgiving, and emergency credit, which all translated to symbolic solidarity, support for your local church community, into tangible aid, into actual aid. Forming what Garcia Marduga, another author you don't need to know, calls a mutual economy. This idea of that, like, there were people who were rich enough, who were middle class, who were upper class, who were able to help fund their church community and able to help support the people who did not have funds. So this directly goes against this sort of idea of poor man's religion. But it's important to understand that, like, while I'm discussing this, that each Christian society, each Christian community was different. Like, this isn't a time where communication is not easy, to say the least. Like, each town, each village, each community celebrated, viewed Christianity and worshiped Christianity slightly differently. Going back to what I said about Egyptians and Greeks and Italians all having different views before they convert. This became so prominent that there are even examples of separate Christian communities, like different towns or different villages, all fighting with each other. A key example of this is the factions over the date of Easter. So I don't know if you know this, but the Orthodox Church, like the Eastern Church, has Christianity on a different date. And this goes back to the 300s BC. And even before that, you have groups basically in Turkey, the first 13 churches, the original, like, really big churches, all view Easter on a separate day than what modern Christianity and the Greek churches ended up deciding, like, what the day of Easter is. So there's clear, like, theological disagreement this early on, and clearly, like, it's different. Another example of the, sorry, 1 second. Yes, okay, so in regard to their multiculturalism, Byler, another author you don't need to know, quotes that Christianity was, quote, composed of individuals converted from Jewish, Greek, or Roman ethnic backgrounds who worshipped the Jewish God or the Greek, Roman, and Egyptian gods. This was a time where you could do both, where it was mixed and it wasn't just one religion or the other. Like, this sort of idea of polytheism is really important to understand. Early Christian society is not the way that we understand it today. We can see direct evidence of this in the accounts of Paul when he describes what he saw as actions not in line with his teaching of Christianity in his letters to Corinth. And he berated them, basically told them off, and said that they should follow his version of Christianity. These people maintain some of their tradition after converting. And Paul's letters directly say, Paul's letters to Corinth specifically say that they need to abandon their previous traditions. Quote, since some have become so accustomed to idols until now, they still think that the food that they eat, they still think of food they eat as food offered to an idol, and their conscience being weak is defiled, end quote. This idea that these people used to worship idols and still are, worshiping local gods, stuff like that, like the god of your town or community, stuff like that. But Corinth was not the only Christian community not following the religious line, as the Paulites, Paulines, however you want to say it, understood it. In Rome, the rapidly growing Christian community was at odds with the Orthodox Jewry. As Dutoit, another author, writings show, the expanding Roman Christian community had been operating extremely closely, like with the Jews. Christian converts were known to meet at Jewish synagogues and claimed the religious protections afforded to Jews. Jews were allowed to worship their own religion and weren't like pushed to convert, and were allowed to build synagogues because the Romans saw them as an ancient religion that were older than them, and therefore they must have something going on. They were allowed to worship. They weren't forced to convert. And so in the early years, Christians definitely took advantage of this. And because the Romans wouldn't have liked they didn't understand until like 44 AD that Christians were even different than Jews. They just thought them as like a different sect, nothing to worry about, anything like that. It's only when the Jews and the Christians in Rome started rioting and having mass like fights, gang wars essentially, over each other. That's finally when the Romans say, oh, this is something different.
Yeah.
Oh. But they had like taken advantage of the fact that they were able to go into Jewish synagogues and convert people there, or speak at the foot of it. Paul quotes, "There will be affliction and distress for everyone." So these people are fighting, and Paul is understandably not very happy about that. And so he writes, quote, "There will be affliction and distress for everyone who does evil, both the Jew first and the Greek," the converts. "Honor and peace for everyone who does good, both the Jew first and the Greek, for God shows no partiality." He's basically writing like, you guys need to stop fighting, and if you stop fighting, God's going to be happy, because you guys can't stop. He specifically calls out the hypocrisy in Corinth, between the fighting Christian factions in Corinth, by saying, "For as it is written, the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you." Basically saying to the Jewish community that was converting that the Gentiles now have a bad image of God, or a bad image of our religion as a whole, because you keep fighting with the Christians, and you need to stop fighting with them. So, as shown, Christianity's differences in the era of Paul are significant. And, you know, it's different in every area. I have more written here, but I feel like I've made that point. Lastly, the pluralistic nature of Christianity to its converts also extended through class boundaries, so getting more into the class section. As previously mentioned, the common understanding of poor man's religion doesn't really hold up, and we also see that this is, I'm just quoting the primary source. Granted, it's 50 years after my focus, which is like, 50 AD, roughly, but a letter from Pliny the Younger, a Roman governor and a famous sort of philosopher, author type person. He governed what is now like the area just across Istanbul, like the eastern Turkey, northeastern Turkey, in a region called Pontus Bithynia. And he basically has to do a crackdown on the Christians. And he writes to Emperor Trajan, because Emperor Trajan's like his pen pal. It's actually, when you read it, it's kind of funny. He's like asking him, "Hey, can I do this? Can I do this?" And Emperor Trajan every time is like, "I really don't care. Please stop talking to me." It's very funny to read. But anyway, he writes about how when he's arresting these Christians, that a great many persons of every age, of every social class, of men and women alike, not only the towns, but the villages and even the rural districts as well, end quote. This document that we still have, miraculously, proves that Christianity, at least in 100 AD, is comprised of literally everyone. I don't quote it here, but Pliny the Younger also talks about how the fact that his prisons are overfilling from the amount of Christians he has to arrest, because there are just so many, and they are everywhere, from every group, in cities, in towns, in villages, from every class, from every, it's not just a religion of the displaced, it's not just a religion of the marginalized, it's a much bigger movement than that. So, in closing, the evidence provided paints a picture of religion that found its converts everywhere and everywhere. Wow, I submitted this, and I didn't ever notice that. And early Christianity cannot be understood in a simple or monotone way. This was the foundation for what the church would become, and the beliefs of all kinds were finding purchase in Christianity. In many ways, Christianity mimics Rome in how it came and adapted local customs while still, as Paul did, maintaining its religious doctrine. Early Christianity took in all sorts, and previous historiography on the subject painted the narrative of early Christians incorrectly. Early Christians spread through all groups, Gentiles and Semites, rich and poor, regardless of occupation or location. In this, the early church found itself outpaced by its new far-flung communities, finding themselves just as varied as their converts. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Any questions? Comments, anything like that?
What'd you say?
Oh, sorry. Any questions, comments, anything like that? I'm cool to answer if you guys have anything.
That was deep.
Yeah. Sorry for taking up too much.
Are you able to email that or text that?
Yeah, I was.
I would love that.
So
I'll
I'm-
send you a text. Right
So I mentioned at the beginning that I'm going to have a piece of. I'm going to use this piece of paper. But I'm going to write on the back, email, and you guys write your emails down on that paper, and I will email this paper to you, and then also.